It was Operation Iraqi Freedom with the United States Army. Also the Global War on Terror, the same with the United States Army, active duty.
In your rank?
I was a captain in the Operation Iraqi Freedom. In the Global War on Terror, I was actually a first lieutenant at that time.
Okay. And the specific places where you served?
For Operation Iraqi Freedom, it was Baghdad International Airport, BIOP. And then for the Global War on Terror was at Misau Kaserne, which is in Kaiserslautern, Germany.
Okay. Where were you drafted, or where did you enlist?
I enlisted out of Enfield, Connecticut, 1994. Was signed up at the MEP station in Springfield, Massachusetts.
And where were you living at the time?
In Enfield.
And who were you living with?
My parents, 17 years old.
Why did you join?
I joined the Army because at that time, when I had, looking to graduate high school, going to college was an option. I had applied to schools, applied for the ROTC scholarship so that I could, fund my way through school. And I did not get the ROTC scholarship. And when I found out that my parents would have a stake in paying for my education, I realized that meant that they would have a stake in telling me a lot of, how I should be living, acting, and what I should be doing. And I realized that I'd rather be a little bit more independent. And as I was thinking those things, the Army recruiter happened to make a timely call and told me all about the education benefits associated with the Army, and I signed up.
Why did you pick the particular branch of service you joined?
It afforded me the opportunity to do some high adventure things such as going airborne. I really wasn't interested in any other branches of service. My grandfather was in the Army. He served in Guadalcanal.
What do you recall about your first days in service?
I remember the bus ride. To basic training. I sat in the front seat of, it was like a Greyhound bus. And here I was sitting next to this guy was a giant from Brooklyn. And he spoke in grunts. There's another another guy enlisted. The seat I rode on was busted. It was like a 4-hour drive. It was, literally like 89 to 95 degrees. Anyways, we get there and it was just, it was just fast paced. I was a bit of a, big talker, big dreamer, and kind of realized real quick that you can't do that sort of thing if you're going to fit in.
Tell me about your boot camp or training experiences.
It was, fast paced. I did pretty well. Sometimes I took charge, and other times just kind of kept quiet. But it kind of went by in a blur. I did a lot of running and just kind of stayed quiet.
Anything particularly unique or interesting, or things you wouldn't want to do again?
Yeah, I was up for a distinguished honor graduate, and there's like 1 or 2 people per platoon that they recommend for this, and my birthday happened to fall during my basic training, and I snuck away to make a phone call, and I got caught, and that wasn't good. I wouldn't do that again.
Do you remember your instructors, and what do you remember about them?
Drill Sergeant Eden, Drill Sergeant Brack, Drill Sergeant Cavazos. I don't know, I remember they were all just... It's hard to even say. I've been in the Army so long now, I think in terms of they were just drill sergeants. They were all good drill sergeants, really. Drill Sergeant Brack was really especially good. He came from an older style Army. He was the senior drill sergeant. Really, he cared more about teaching us the right way to do things instead of just the book way. He would talk to us about his experiences, share with us a little bit more. He was still really kind of strict. He was still a drill sergeant.
What were some of the ways that you got through the time, or how did you get through boot camp training? With friends, by yourself?
It was kind of just, I did a lot of self-reflecting. it went by so fast. It was like a blur.
And what did you learn or realize as a result of your training?
When to speak and when not to speak.
Okay, and where did you go from there after basic training?
After basic training, I went to Fort Lee, Virginia for AIT, and from there to Fort Leonard Wood for truck driver school, and then to Fort Benning, Georgia for airborne school.
And how long were you at Fort Benning?
3 weeks for airborne school.
And after Fort Benning?
Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 528th Special Operations Support Battalion, airborne.
In their role, or?
I was a aviation fuel specialist, refueling helicopters for the Special Operations 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Delta Force, doing a lot of high-speed aviation refueling. I had a really that was for 3 years. That was from 2.5 years, from 95 to 1997. We did a lot of good stuff. I went to Panama for 30 days. Did several operations. One out in Nevada, out in White Sands, New Mexico. One down in Camp Blanding, Florida. Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I was in a really, really good unit. The outfit taught us a lot about how to just take initiative and not wait to be told, but to take action. And as a result of it, actually, 5 of my peers, including myself, all were, tracked into an officer rank. Several of them are warrant officers, and there was 3 of us that went to become officers.
And from there?
Well, as I said, I went into being an officer. I had a good platoon leader, recommended me for the Army's Green to Gold Scholarship Program. I actually wasn't going to apply. He talked me into it. I was going to get out of the Army, go back to Yukon, join a fraternity, and do all the fun stuff. Well, he talked me into sign up for this scholarship, and lo and behold, I was awarded a scholarship to go to school for 4 years, fully paid for. I ended up going to Worcester Polytechnic Institute during 1997 to 2001 on the ROTC program. It was great. They paid for school. I was able to collect my GI Bill, and WPI actually waived all the housing and fees. So it was a really good time.
What was it like being on campus as an older student, but a student who had military experience with some of the younger students?
I couldn't get over some of these younger guys, how they, it's like they just, first time in their lives they were let out of the cage or something. For me, it was, I kind of relished the opportunity to not have to get up every morning at 5:30 and, work. And I did really well in school. I would go back there again for the rest of my life if I could.
And your degree? A bachelor's degree?
And a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering. And at the same time, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. I chose the quartermaster corps because I had roots as a fuel specialist, as well as the fact that I thought that the quartermaster corps, being logistics, had the most relevance to any future career in business that I might pursue.
And from college, what did you do? What did you pursue?
I was stationed back at Fort Bragg, across the street from where I was enlisted. Of all the places, the huge Army, and I ended up right across the street with the, I was in the 530th SNS Battalion, Supply and Services Battalion, and I was in the 612th Quartermaster Company. It's a parachute rigger company. We supported the 18th Airborne Corps with personnel parachutes during our peacetime mission. The wartime mission was aerial services. We were designed to supply so many metric tons of aerial dropped supplies using A-22 kit bags and other things that would be dropped.
And do you remember being called up for the first time to go off to war?
Yeah, actually, I remember before that. I remember watching Colin Powell. I was with my company commander. She and I we did an officer's run, and there was a Hardee's, fast food joint. It was located near where our company was. We got done with our run, and she's like, "Hey, let's go over to Hardee's. We'll grab a bite to eat." And they had a TV mounted on the wall, and we were in there having our little breakfast sandwiches and coffees. And Colin Powell's thing, he came on. It was probably, I don't know, I think it was in the morning when that happened. Either that was a relay. Anyways, I remember watching that with her, and we were both going, "Man, this is really, it's pretty significant." We were already in Afghanistan at the time. I was in, I talk about the first time getting called up, and I was thinking about Iraq. But if I actually think back to 2001, I had been commissioned, and I was serving as a gold bar recruiter at WPI, and came in that morning, and the planes hit, and that's when I realized, our lives as military officers and soldiers has changed dramatically. It was immediate. It was not that it was, not that it wasn't serious before, but it had an immediate consequential feeling to everything that we did.
And from the call up, where did you go? What base? And where were you transferred to?
All right, so Iraq. So Colin Powell did his speech, and shortly thereafter, our company got put on what's called a TIPFID. I don't even know what that acronym stands for. It's just that's what they tell you when you're on the list. Our sister company, the 647th Quartermaster Company, was also on it. They got slated to go in through Kuwait. They were going to go through the south of Iraq. We were designed to come in through the north. We were going to go through Turkey. We were going to stage in Germany, then go through Incirlik, Turkey, and then in through the northern part of Iraq with, I think, either the 173rd CTAF or some of the other larger brigades and elements that were going to go. Well, when Turkey politically decided that they were not going to be a part of the war, we ended up stationed in Germany, and that's where we stayed for the first 5 months of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
And do you remember arriving, and what was that like?
In Germany?
In Germany and both in Iraq.
Well, two separate actions. In Germany, we arrived on the ground, and we always had thought we were going to get called up, so we were pretty much in a high state of training. But we ended up getting pretty tied into some long-term missions. We were parachute riggers, so we were rigging parachutes. My platoon, actually, I had 3 24-hour missions, so I had to break my platoon into 3 sections. I had one packing parachutes pretty much full-time. Another section that was loading 463L pallets out of Ramstein Air Base. And then the third that was rigging those 463L pallets back at Misau. So we had 2 rigging operations, 1 aircraft loading operation, and that was around the clock. So management of people became pretty significant. But then that lasted for about 5 months, and then we deployed back home. And then about a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, I don't remember the exact dates, but in 2005, we got the actual call-up that we were going to Iraq. And I had actually, in between that time, I had been taken out of the 612th, and I worked as the aide-de-camp for the commanding general of the COSCOM. And I was always going to get out of the Army and go National Guard or something and use my degree. And I told the general this, and he says, "No, I'm going to keep you in." And then one day he says, "Hey, we're going to war, but you have a good sense about you for business, and you have a business plan. And do you want to get out?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm still going to get out when we get back." He goes, "Well, all right, well, I'll let you go now." He let me go back to my battalion, and they deployed. And within a month, my battalion commander says, "Hey, I can't let you out. You got to come down range with me." So we ended up deploying back in my old unit with the 530th.
And stepping off the plane in Iraq, what was your first thought or your first experience?
Well, it was hot. I don't know. It wasn't like, it wasn't like Saving Private Ryan, It wasn't like there was a high level of tension, but it was, you're on a C-130, it's packed, you've been on it for a couple hours, and they open the door and it's an airfield. And there was no real, for us, the war had been pretty well established. The friendly bases were pretty friendly. We got off the plane and we were in country.
And once there, what was your job assignment there?
I was the battalion adjutant of Logistics Task Force 530.
While there, did you see any combat?
I actually did not see any firsthand, combat. I did, however, witness, mortar rounds, rockets. We were on a convoy that was halted, and it was an IED suspected ahead of us, and we had insurgents run by our truck, and we stopped. We halted them and had the military police come and pick them up. But that was the closest I came to firsthand combat.
And there were casualties in your unit?
There were. We had. I should know this, seeing as I was the adjutant. I processed all their Purple Heart paperwork. We had, within the first month we were there, one of our combat logistics patrols was hit with an IED, and we had 4 people medevaced, seriously wounded. 2 of them ended up being out for several months. One had shrapnel go through his leg, broke his femur, and the other one I think he took it in his arm or his shoulder. Either way, all 4 of them returned to duty though, and the rest of the casualties we had were minor casualties. We had a couple of incidental wounds from shrapnel or other things, but those were the most serious wounds we had.
And a couple of your most memorable experiences, either in combat, out of combat, on leave.
Well, on leave, I took my wife to Italy. Well, she wasn't my wife then. I had 15 days of leave, and I timed it in October when it was nice, and I went to Italy. We went to Rome, Florence, Tuscany, Positano, and I proposed to my wife on leave. Now, on a personal story, I met my wife 2 weeks before I deployed to Iraq, or a month almost. It was 2 weeks on leave, and then a month down at Fort Bragg. So I didn't really know her for very long before I deployed, but she wrote me a letter every single day I was gone, and that's when I knew she was the one.
Any medals or citations?
I received the Army Commendation Medal.
And for what?
For the block of service, for commendatory service while I was there doing my job.
And as an officer, what can you tell us about battle planning?
My God. The military decision-making process and battle planning. There's a field manual out there on it somewhere. It's a continual process. I firmly believe that our battalion was quite successful at avoiding combat scenarios because our job. Let me explain something. We're not the infantry guys that are out there to kick the doors in. We were there to support those guys to deliver the logistics that they needed to do their mission. So, for us to engage in battle was, a significant act. We had to protect ourselves, and we had to, defeat any enemy that attacked us, but we weren't looking for attack. Now, that being said, our battalion commander did a good job of planning to ensure that we were not susceptible, out there putting ourselves into harm's way in the most susceptible manner. We did a lot of intelligence planning to time our activities, to time our missions to the places and times where we felt that it would be safest for us to travel on the roads in Baghdad and around Baghdad.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
I was lucky. I had an office, and I had a telephone in my office, and there's a DSN network, so I called directly back to Bradley, and I had them patch me through to local Connecticut phone numbers, so I was able to call pretty frequently. In addition, I also had a calling card when that wasn't working. Yeah.
Did you find that was the experience of most soldiers? Or is that just really for
we actually no. It was like I had my phone and I would let people use the phone, and it was my job as the adjutant. Part of my job was morale, welfare, and recreation. So I made clear to all the soldiers how to do those the calling sequences. And actually, our phone center that we had set up, if you dialed direct DSN, you could dial back to the States to a local hub and get back. Now, some guys, they would not take advantage of that, but it was pretty readily available. We also had a computer center. We did, Kathy and I did video conferencing, all that stuff. Text messages, emails. But the most significant form of communication that I received while I was there was her letters almost every day.
Physical letters?
Actual letters, yeah.
Actual letters. What was the food like? Beyond MREs.
No, I put on like 5 pounds when I was over there. Our food was fantastic. It was a lot of the same, but it was, I don't know. I've never been one to complain about food. Take what I can get.
And what were the menus like?
I don't know. We had, some mysterious gray meat, vegetables, and mashed potatoes. There was a carving station. I remember that. There was every day they had some form of meat that they were slicing up for us. We used to joke that it was camel meat.
And did you have plenty of supplies when you were there?
Yeah, we were very well supplied.
Supplies sent from home as well, or?
It was a lot of toiletries and incidentals.
Things that you needed that had to be supplied that weren't readily available?
No, I despite popular myth and opinion, I do believe there are units that were undersupplied, especially in the beginning part of the war. But remember, we were in the third year, three and a half years into it. By that time, the war had evolved to a point where supplies were readily available. The supply networks were well established. Matter of fact, when you went into Kuwait, you were given your body armor, the full run. I'm not quite sure during the first 2 to 3 years of the war how it was, but while we were there, it was very well established. Now, some of the soldiers operating in some of the forward operating bases, the FOBs, that we went to and delivered supplies to, they were living in much more austere environments because they were in remote locations from the centralized hub of Buyout, or Camp Victory, as it was called. Some of those places, FOB Sword, Mahmudiya, there's a couple of places. I mean, they were living in pretty impoverished style, for the army. But that being said, they had taken a lot of steps to make sure that those soldiers received the best in-class incidentals. Making sure they had toilets, porta-johns, things like that, showers.
Did you feel pressure or stress, and what were the areas you felt the most stress about when you were there?
Managing and leading my soldiers, dealing with, I had a couple soldiers who had some personal issues that came up while we were there, family matters. For me, I was relatively, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't have a lot of stress personally. I had a good family support network back here that I knew I was well taken care of. But I had some soldiers who didn't necessarily have that same support, so that put me under some stress. That and just the Army, some of the systems for processing our soldiers' awards. The way we had to process awards was a bit of a pain. So that kind of got stressful.
Can you describe one example of that?
Yeah, we were located in Baghdad. Our brigade was located in Taji, and our higher element from the brigade was located in Balad. Now, on a map, those are several hundred kilometers away from one another. So to process transactions and to pick up awards, it became a process of having to go on convoys just to get awards, or taking flights just to pick up awards. Now, we would package it and time it so that we were doing it with other missions. But if there was, say, a grammatic error on one of the submissions, the Army says you can scratch it out and write in what it's supposed to be, but Nobody wants something going to the colonel or the general with a typographic error on it. So people would get silly, and just stuff like that.
Was there something special you did for good luck while you were a soldier?
No, I never really believed in luck. Just kind of, if you do the right thing, you'll be taken care of, I think.
How did people entertain themselves?
It's funny you asked that question. When I was at Fort Lee, when I was stationed at Fort Lee, I went to the Civil War Museum of the Soldier, and they had Civil War, how the Civil War soldier lived and entertained themselves, and it really wasn't much different. We had a lot of times playing baseball. I was in charge of MWR, so I started a softball league. I brought wrestling mats over to Iraq to work out and practice on. A lot of exercising. Smoked cigars, a lot of cigars. We drank near beer. We weren't allowed to drink alcohol, so we would pretend like we were drinking a beer. Watched a lot of TV shows. I had a small TV and a little mini DVD player, so we would get these DVDs and series of TV shows back home and watch them.
And were there entertainers that came to any of the bases you were stationed at? Or?
Yeah, what's the guy's name? Vince Vaughn came in. Our congressman came in. Steve Simmons. I think it was Steve Simmons. Yeah, he came. There were a couple others. Vince Vaughn was the one I really remember.
Aside from Italy, what did you do when you were on leave?
Oh, that's it. We went to Italy, got engaged. Not much more I can talk about on camera.
And were there other locations you traveled to while in the service that you haven't mentioned so far?
No, Italy, Germany, Kuwait, Iraq, Panama, and most of the contingent 48 states. Continental 48 states, I'm sorry.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual event?
The Army is all about humor. Any particularly humorous events?
Any pranks that would have been pulled, or?
Yeah. Yeah, our battalion executive officer, he was an interesting guy. He was what you'd call a very die-hard conservative, neoconservative Republican. And he didn't push... He didn't really push a political agenda on the soldiers, but, amongst friends, we would get to talking politics and religion quite a bit. And he was extremely homophobic. Well, we had some friends back home, and on his birthday, his birthday happened to fall on a day. Every day we had our daily battle update briefs. It was kind of like a command and staff. The whole staff would get together with all the commanders, and we'd review the upcoming missions for the night. Any administrative actions that would occur. The battalion commander was there, and the command sergeant major, and so we had a package that came in the mail for our XO. We had him open it at this meeting, and as I said, he was extremely homophobic, and somebody had packaged a very phallic thing that he opened, and he got so embarrassed. And the best part was our battalion commander had a good sense of humor and was like, cracking on him the rest of the day. We used to also, what else would we do? Oh, we had slides, the PowerPoint slides. We would always mess with his slides. Every time we'd change his, he'd put a rainbow flag or a pink triangle on it. Yeah, just stuff he did to pass the time. What else? Oh, we toilet papered his vehicle.
What did you think of fellow officers or fellow soldiers, both in the positive and negative?
I actually don't have much negative to say about my fellow officers or soldiers. I think the soldiers over there performed brilliantly. They were well trained. I can't say enough actually about the National Guard soldiers that I saw over there. I imagine the circumstances under which they deployed were a little bit more significant than ours, because as an active duty soldier, you're trained to deploy. That's what you do. It's part of your career. I'm not diminishing that experience for any active duty soldiers. But now that I'm out and I'm in the National Guard, I can kind of relate to both sides. And I think that giving up the day-to-day career, leaving a job behind, and then deploying, especially for professionals, is quite a challenge. And I give them all the credit in the world for the high levels of training that they put themselves through and performed brilliantly. Some officers I saw, there were some. It's no different than any other every average life. Anything that you're in, you're gonna have the good, the bad, and the great and the ugly. We had all of them.
And as an officer with incoming soldiers, is there any particular advice you could give to them, or any sorts of issues you saw with incoming younger soldiers?
I think the something I deal with today is I command a company in the National Guard now. I talk to my soldiers quite a bit about what it means to be a soldier and how that differentiates us from the everyday average American citizen. And that is, we're volunteers. We're a volunteer army. And what that means is we've already put ourselves out there for the service of our country, our state, our brethren. And in that regards, I tell them that they have to be selfless in their service. It's something that I think is a bit challenging for some of our younger generation. There's been a generation gap, I think. Maybe in the 1990s, there was a generation that was raised under relative success in this nation, and sacrifice is not something that maybe they've seen a lot of, and they're very individually oriented. So that becomes a continual leadership challenge, and without becoming, abrasive to their logic, methodologies, and thought processes, I try to always influence them to think away from themselves, to think about their peers, their buddies, their family, and how their actions can positively influence those around them.
Do you recall the day your service ended? Where were you?
Well, it hasn't ended yet, but I can recall the day that I got out of the active duty. I was out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and it was rather nondescript. It was really just kind of a lot of paperwork processing.
What did you do in the days or weeks afterward?
No, I came back home. I took a little time. I moved in here to this house, built my bar.
Did you go back to school for an advanced degree since
Yep.
then?
Actually pursuing my master's in business administration from the University of Connecticut. Actually, I have a meeting tonight in 4 hours for a group project.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service, and do you continue those friendships?
I did. I have one. Yeah, I actually have two I can talk about. One when I was enlisted, and one was an officer. When I was enlisted, a guy named Jeremy Bruning. He and I were roommates, and we became really close friends. He has stayed in the Army. He's gone into the active Guard Reserves, so he's a full-time soldier working with the National Guard. He has deployed twice now to Iraq, and he's currently serving on his second tour in Iraq. And I stay in touch with him through emails and phone calls when he's available. He's got 3 lovely children. He lives out in Washington. His family's from Iowa. And then the one when I was an officer was my chaplain, actually. I have a special relationship with him. He brought me a lot personally, through a lot of soul searching. Really non-religious, just philosophical discussions that we would have while we were in Iraq. We would go up on top of a building. All the buildings were flat roofed. We'd climb up on top of the building in the heat of the day and just chat, talk about things that were happening in the world. And anyways, he's an interesting guy. He's actually he's been published in the USA Today several times. Actually, this coming Friday he's supposed to have an article. He interned for Maxine Waters before becoming a minister in the Baptist faith, and then he decided to join the Army to become a chaplain. And We served together. He helped me through a rough patch in my life. I went through a divorce before going to Iraq, and we became very close friends. He actually married me, and my wife came to Enfield to perform the ceremony.
Finally, did you join any veterans organizations after your
Did.
service?
I am a member of the East Windsor Veterans Commission.
And serving in what capacity?
As a committee member. We put on functions for veterans. I've been pursuing an agenda with them to become much more of a communications piece for the veterans of the town, working with the local newspapers to talk about veterans events, veterans benefits, hiring activities for any unemployed veterans, things like that.
And what have you gone on to do as a career after the war, after your service?
I'm working with Alston Power. In addition to being a commander in the National Guard, I manage a business for parts and logistics for coal-fired power plants for their environmental equipment.
In retrospect, how do you feel about the job you did while you were in service?
I feel great about it. I think the Army has done more for me than I've done for it. I strive every day when I put my uniform on, and even when I don't, to try to honor that, to try to live up to the benefits that I've received.
And has your military experience influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general?
It has. I think. That's a loaded question if there ever was one. I lost a friend. I lost a fraternity brother. We didn't serve together, but I actually. So I was a Gold Bar recruiter, and I actually got this guy to join ROTC and got him to join my fraternity. His name was Ryan Jones, and he was killed in Iraq. And not that one incident changed anything, but it's incidences like those when you see young life just. It's got to go for a good cause. I guess that's the bottom line. And I think diplomacy should be pursued to its extreme before pursuing an agenda of military action. That being stated, I think that military action is a necessity in certain aspects, especially certain theaters of operation where they don't necessarily have established governments that can be negotiated with, where diplomacy is not a requirement. And in cases where there is a military necessity, I think that it's our government's responsibility to give the military everything that it needs to do the job appropriately, and that includes manpower, funding, equipment. We shouldn't under-deploy, we should over-deploy.
And is that a reflection of your feelings about the current military conflict?
It's hard to say. I think in parts yes, in parts no. That's a complicated question. The dynamic in Iraq is very multifaceted. I think the initial objective militarily was to overthrow the government. I think it's common knowledge now that to secure the peace, the requirement for ground level troops was higher than originally anticipated. And I think that it's unfortunate because some of our best military leaders told the civilian leaders that was going to be the case, and there was if you look back, there was a bunch of people who were let go from the military or taken out of jobs because they said that. And I think that's unfortunate when the civilian leadership doesn't listen to the military strategy and they have their own agenda, I guess.
And finally, just this morning, the Iraqi cabinet approved a U.S. withdrawal date for December 31st of 2011. What do you think about this in lieu of your experience?
As long as that government, our objective there was to secure the peace for Iraq and to help them establish a democracy. If that democracy feels that they are comfortable with a timetable for our withdrawal, I think that we should support that. I think that being said, we should diplomatically ensure that they're making the right decision.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that was not covered in this interview?
No, thank you for allowing me the time to share some of my experiences. I do, I said no, but I guess I should say I feel that I've been rather fortunate in my military experience. I know that there are many soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, National Guardsmen who have had less fortunate experiences, and I count my blessings every single day for the fortune that I've had. And I hope to, repay that back to those that have been less fortunate.
Recall the day your service ended. Where were you?
Well, it hasn't ended yet, but I can recall the day that I got out of the active duty. I was down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and it was rather nondescript. It was really just kind of a lot of paperwork processing.
What did you do in the days or weeks afterward?
No, I came back home. I took a little time. I moved in here to this house, built my bar.
Did you go back to school for an advanced degree since then?
Actually pursuing my master's in business administration from the University of Connecticut. I actually have a meeting tonight in 4 hours for a group project.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service, and do you continue those friendships?
I did. I have one. Yeah, I actually have two I can talk about. One when I was enlisted, and one was an officer. When I was enlisted, a guy named Jeremy Bruning. He and I were roommates, and we became really close friends. He has stayed in the Army. He's gone into the active guard reserves, so he's a full-time soldier working with the National Guard. He has deployed twice now to Iraq, and he's currently serving on his second tour in Iraq. And I stay in touch with him through emails and phone calls when he's available. He's got 3 lovely children. He lives out in Washington. His family's from Iowa. And then the one when I was an officer was my chaplain, actually. I have a special relationship with him. He brought me a lot personally, through a lot of soul searching. Really non-religious, just philosophical discussions that we would have while we were in Iraq. We'd go up on top of a building. All the buildings were flat roofed. We'd climb up on top of the building in the heat of the day and just chat, talk about things that were happening in the world. And anyways, he's an interesting guy. He's actually he's been published in the USA Today several times. Actually, this coming Friday he's supposed to have an article. He interned for Maxine Waters before becoming a minister in the Baptist faith, and then he decided to join the Army to become a chaplain, and we served together. He helped me through a rough patch in my life. I went through a divorce before going to Iraq, and we became very close friends. He actually married me, and my wife came to Enfield to perform the ceremony.
Finally, did you join any veterans organizations after your service?
I am a member of the East Windsor Veterans Commission.
And serving in what capacity?
As a committee member. We put on functions for veterans. I've been pursuing an agenda with them to become much more of a communications piece for the veterans of the town, working with the local newspapers to talk about veterans events, veterans benefits, hiring activities for any unemployed veterans, things like that.
And what have you gone on to do as a career after the war, after your service?
I'm working with Alston Power. In addition to being a commander in the National Guard, I manage a business for parts and logistics for coal-fired power plants for their environmental equipment.
In retrospect, how do you feel about the job you did while you were in service?
I feel great about it. I think the Army has done more for me than I've done for it. I strive every day when I put my uniform on, and even when I don't, to try to honor that, to try to live up to the benefits that I've received.
And has your military experience influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general?
It has. I think. That's a loaded question if there ever was one. I lost a friend. I lost a fraternity brother. We didn't serve together, but I actually. So I was a gold bar recruiter, and I actually got this guy to join ROTC, and got him to join my fraternity. His name was Ryan Jones, and he was killed in Iraq. And not that one incident changed anything, but it's incidences like those when you see young life just it's got to go for a good cause. I guess that's the bottom line. And I think diplomacy should be pursued to its extreme before pursuing an agenda of military action. That being stated, I think that military action is a necessity in certain aspects, especially certain theaters of operation where they don't necessarily have established governments that can be negotiated with, where diplomacy is not a requirement. And in cases where there is a military necessity, I think that it's our government's responsibility to give the military everything that it needs to do the job appropriately, and that includes manpower, funding, equipment. We shouldn't under-deploy, we should over-deploy.
And is that a reflection of your feelings about the current military conflict?
It's hard to say. I think in parts yes, in parts no. That's a complicated question. The dynamic in Iraq is very multifaceted. I think the initial objective militarily was to overthrow the government. I think it's common knowledge now that to secure the peace, the requirement for ground level troops was higher than originally anticipated. And I think that it's unfortunate because some of our best military leaders told the civilian leaders that was going to be the case, and there was if you look back, there was a bunch of people were let go from the military or taken out of jobs because they said that. And I think that's unfortunate when the civilian leadership doesn't listen to the military strategy and they have their own agenda, I guess.
And finally, just this morning, the Iraqi cabinet approved a U.S. withdrawal date for December 31st of 2011. What do you think about this in lieu of your experience?
As long as that government, our objective there was to secure the peace for Iraq and to help them establish a democracy. If that democracy feels that they are comfortable with a timetable for our withdrawal, I think that we should support that. I think that being said, we should diplomatically ensure that they're making the right decision.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that was not covered in this interview?
No. Thank you for allowing me the time to share some of my experiences. I do, I said no, but I guess I should say I feel that I've been rather fortunate in my military experience. I know that there are many soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, National Guardsmen who have had less fortunate experiences, and I count my blessings every single day for the fortune that I've had. And I hope to, repay that back to those that have been less fortunate.